Today, we're taking a descent into darkness, a journey through a ruined kingdom, and ultimately a climb back into the light. We're diving into a work that transcends mere literature to grapple with the very fabric of human nature, spiritual warfare, and divine justice. I'm talking about John Milton's absolute masterpiece, Paradise Lost. In this explainer, we're going to unpack a story of cosmic rebellion, the deep tragedy of our origins, and the incredibly enduring hope of grace.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. You know, you've probably heard that before, right? It's one of the most iconic lines ever written. Spoken by Satan right after being cast out of the celestial realm, these words perfectly frame the spiritual stakes of what we're looking at today. Because this isn't just some fantasy battle, it's the ultimate epic conflict of pride versus obedience. It asks a terrifying question. What actually happens when our desire for absolute autonomy outweighs the peace of submitting to something greater?
But before we get deep into the story, you have to understand the sheer monumental ambition behind this text. John Milton didn't just casually pen this. Published back in 1667, he composed the staggering 10,000-line epic in blank verse while completely blind. Imagine that. He was often ill, grieving the heartbreaking loss of his wife and infant daughter, and dictating these lines out loud to his assistants and family members. He originally wanted to write a traditional epic about King Arthur, but the turbulence of the English Civil War, plus his own intense suffering, pushed him to create a totally new kind of Christian epic, one that would encompass all of space, time, and theology.
So, what was his point with all this? Well, Milton states his purpose right at the very beginning of Book 1. He wants to justify the ways of God to men. He wasn't just writing a simple story about a talking snake and an apple. Not at all. He was attempting a towering philosophical feat. He wanted to reconcile the crushing reality of human tragedy and suffering with the concept of a completely good, omnipotent God. He wanted to explain exactly why God allows free will, even when that free will leads to such devastating moral consequences.
Okay, let's move into our first major section, the anatomy of pride and the tragic illusion of freedom. We really need to dissect the psychology of literature's ultimate rebel here, because on the surface, we see this heroic facade. Satan is undeniably charismatic. He's this brilliant orator who rallies a full third of the angels in heaven with his unconquerable will and his courage never to submit or yield. And because of that, a lot of romantic poets like William Blake and Lord Byron actually viewed Satan as the hero of the poem. But contrast that with the tragic reality. Thinkers like C.S. Lewis and other scholars point out that Satan is actually the ultimate master of self-deception. His rebellion stems purely from envy over the Son of God. He isn't some noble liberator. He's a being so consumed by pride that he consciously perverts his own nature. When you strip away the illusion of strength, all that's left is complete agonizing isolation.
Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. Just take a second to let the weight of that sink in. This is the horrifying realization Satan reaches in Book 4. He finally understands that no matter how much territory he conquers, no matter how many things he ruins, he cannot escape his own mind. His true punishment isn't just the physical lake of fire, it's his inescapable internal psychological isolation.
Moving on to our next section, let's explore the twisted truth and the deception in the garden. So as the epic moves from the vast, ruined cosmic landscapes of hell and the celestial plains of heaven, the warfare actually shrinks down into this intimately personal psychological seduction right here on Earth. Let's break down Satan's methodical manipulation of Eve. Milton shows us beautifully and tragically that evil rarely presents itself as overt villainy. First, Satan, possessing the serpent, flatters Eve. He uses the language of Renaissance love poetry, calling her almost divine. It sounds great, right? Second, he casually questions God's strict command not to eat from the tree of knowledge. He twists the truth just a bit, asking if God is maybe just trying to keep them ignorant. And then third, the final hook, the false promise. He promises that eating the fruit absolutely won't kill them, but will actually elevate them to Godhead. It is literally a masterclass in psychological manipulation.
Because here's the thing about deception. It doesn't work by forcing you into a corner. It preys on what's already inside. It targets vanity, ambition, and that incredibly human desire for absolute autonomy. Eve wants the knowledge. And Adam? Well, when Adam finds out Eve has eaten the fruit, he knowingly eats it too. He isn't tricked at all. He chooses to fall because he simply cannot bear to be separated from her. It's this complex intellectual and emotional rationalization that leads directly to their ultimate spiritual compromise.
And the very moment they make that choice, the universe physically reacts. Milton writes, "Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing, gave signs of woe."
It's just a haunting, tragic crescendo. That fatal act of disobedience fractures creation itself. The perfect communion they had between humanity, nature, and the divine, it's violently severed. Which brings us to Section 3, the heavy cost of self-rule and the psychological aftermath of that fatal decision.
So what exactly happens the morning after you decide you just don't need God's rules anymore? Well, the change is immediate and it is devastating. Adam and Eve wake up from terrible nightmares. Their pure, innocent love is instantly corrupted into carnal lust. For the very first time, they experience profound guilt and shame over their nakedness. And instead of supporting each other, what do? They immediately engage in bitter arguments and mutual recrimination, blaming each other for the fall. But the ultimate cost, the true tragedy, is their separation from the tangible, physical presence of God in the garden. They are cast out.
Now you might be thinking this is just a 17th century poem, but Milton was really holding up a mirror to the human condition. Think about the modern echoes of the fall we still see everywhere today. Elevating ambition over obedience, the constant distraction, the bitterness, the spiritual compromise. Our modern obsession with being the absolute rulers of our own lives, of defining our own reality without any higher authority, it's a direct, undeniable reflection of the ancient tragedy of Eden. So I want to pause for a second and just ask you, why does pride so easily disguise itself as freedom? It's so easy to look at Satan or Adam and Eve and judge them, right? But how often do we justify our own rebellion, truly believing we're liberating ourselves, only to find we've locked ourselves in a cage of our own making?
And that leads us to our final section, the paradise within, a look at grace, redemption, and humanity's hope.
Listen, if the story just stopped right there, it would be an absolutely crushing tragedy. But this is where the dark clouds part and the heavenly light pours in. God does not just dispense strict, unyielding justice. Before Adam and Eve even fall, the Son of God steps forward in heaven, offering himself as a voluntary sacrifice to pay the penalty for humanity's future treason. Grace is woven into the narrative from the very beginning. Towards the end, the Archangel Michael reveals this grand arc of humanity to Adam. It starts with innocence, that perfect communion in Eden, then the fall, disobedience, shame, and expulsion. But the trajectory doesn't end in the dirt, it points upward to redemption. Michael shows Adam the whole sweep of biblical history, culminating in the promise of ultimate salvation through Christ. Milton's epic might be titled Paradise Lost, but its final notes are anchored in profound, enduring hope. Which brings us to this incredibly stunning promise delivered by the Archangel Michael. As Adam and Eve are preparing to leave Eden forever, he tells Adam that through faith, obedience, and love, he can possess a paradise within thee, happier far. Think about that. They are losing the physical, perfect garden, but they are being offered something incredibly profound, a quiet, internal redemption, a spiritual kingdom that no serpent can ever infiltrate and no flaming sword can guard. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. The physical Eden might be gone, but the human heart, it remains a battleground between pride and obedience. In a world completely full of noise, distraction, and the constant temptation to crown ourselves kings of our own little empires, how will you cultivate the paradise within? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and keep seeking the light.